Well, hello, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started. My name's Daryl Gordon. I'm Vice President of Marketing. And for most of you in the session today, I'm going to say welcome back to another one of our MediKeeper webinars. As always, we are going to record the session, so no reason to take notes. It'll be available in a couple of days up on our website on demand, and you can listen to it as many times as you enjoy. Today's session is going to run 25 minutes. And today's topic is emotional wellness, emotional intelligence and wellness, keys to success. And Dr. Tyler Amell, our Chief Health and Strategy Officer at MediKeeper, will be tackling the topic. And he has a special guest joining us today. But Dr. Amell, I will let you make that introduction. We're very excited to hear this topic as it's not one we've addressed on our webinars before. So Dr. Amell, I'll let you take it away.
Oh, thank you very much, Daryl, and good morning, everyone. We're so happy that you've taken time out of your busy schedules, especially those of you on the West Coast. It's pretty early there. I know Jarik's in San Diego, Daryl's in San Diego as well, so it's early in the morning. But for the rest of the continent, folks are well into their day, and we definitely appreciate you taking time to join us here today, especially for this topic, because this is a fascinating one from my perspective, and we're definitely looking forward to this discussion. Now, as is customary, from an affiliations and disclosures perspective, I wear a few hats, as does Dr. Conrad, that's for sure. So obviously, I'm the Chief Health and Strategy Officer at MediKeeper. I'm also on faculty at Pacific Coast University for Workplace Health Sciences and sit on the executive board of the Wellness Alliance, which is actually how Dr. Conrad and I met one another many years ago. Dr. Conrad has a very impressive pedigree here. Advisory board for San Diego State University, board member, Homestart, a couple of other groups, the Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence and Organizations. I'd love to learn more about that organization offline. And then one group that I'm quite enamored with here from Dr. Conrad's pedigree is this conscious health piece. Do you mind telling me just a little bit about what that is? Because I don't know anything about it.
Yeah. So it's a startup, and you can see these bags under my eyes. I'm not getting much sleep lately. Really focused on this startup. We launched this thing to help people with chronic health conditions. We're starting with diabetes. We call it the world's first behavioral operating system to help people with these conditions. So for me, it's all about behavior change. That is the root cause. People know the right thing to do, still do the wrong thing. We're trying to solve that.
Oh, interesting. Thank you so much. And both of our contact informations and our LinkedIn handles are on the screen. We're both active on LinkedIn. Please feel free to reach out. I post usually several times a week on evidence-informed practice when it comes to workplace health, occupational medicine, work disability, well-being, all the things related to workplace health. Big topics these days, of course, are costs, because everybody's costs are going through the roof, and how can you control and prevent that from occurring, and lots of other similar things. So definitely reach out. We would love to hear from you.
Yeah.
Now, we've devised a pretty interesting curricula for today. We've got three basic premises that we want to walk through. And, when Dr. Conrad and I were putting this together, we were trying to think of the most meaningful things that we could touch on when it comes to emotional intelligence, and then obviously build towards some take home, some practical things that folks who are joining us here today could bring into practice. Now, we both spent a fair bit of time in human resources. Part of our careers were actually based in HR. My personal experience was that health was a difficult concept for HR to truly wrap their arms around. And I say that as an insider into HR. Whenever I first joined HR as a young professional, I was shocked that health wasn't at the top of the list. Compensation, benefit plan design, all these sort of things. They payroll even. It superseded everything to do with health, which was baffling to me because I'm thinking, okay, what could be more important than the health of the people who, if you don't have their health, you don't have people, right? It's
That's
like
right.
it's a very simple thing for me to justify in my mind, but boy, was I ever wrong. So I learned very quickly that in order to get, the folks within HR, my peers and colleagues, and even, senior level folks like the CFOs in organizations to truly buy into the idea that health is of importance, you had to tie it to something else. So that's why I always speak about health and productivity together, because if you don't tie in productivity outside from the cost issues that, a lot of folks are focused in on these days, you kind of don't get a lot of credibility or traction within organizations when it comes to protecting and promoting the most valuable asset that the organizations have, and that is their people. And of course, the health is paramount to that. So I learned very quickly that that is something I needed to do. Now, when you go too far beyond that, you begin to move into more traditional HR issues like leadership development, talent development, and all these sort of things. And that was my first exposure to emotional intelligence. Now, Dr. Conrad has a different take on this. He's looking at emotional intelligence through the lens as this can be a driver of physical health, productivity, and engagement, which we know engagement is very high on the list of issues that human resources folks are tackling with these days. And so, Dr. Conrad, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this piece. Like, how are you, first of all, what is emotional intelligence? Because not everybody's going to be familiar with that. And then how are you linking that with physical health, with productivity and engagement? I think is a great place to start today's conversation.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a great opening. I got 15 things in my head just based on your opening. But let's start with the kind of a practical definition of emotional intelligence. There are various models, different ways to talk about it, but they all tend to have these elements in common. I understand what's going on with me. I can read my own emotions. I can kind of gauge how I'm feeling and I have some control over it. I might feel like saying this, but I know that's not the appropriate thing to do, so I do something else. So that knowledge and the ability to do something with it is one thing. And then there's a whole social component. So how well do I read the room? How well do I read other people, read the other situation, and kind of adjust appropriately to that? And so those are really the four elements that all these models have in common. And for me, everything starts with there. Everything starts there. When you think about health, when you think about engagement or disengagement, lack of engagement in organizations, there's typically some kind of distraction or preoccupation. And I think the main preoccupation is health. What's going on with me? How do I feel? Am I sick? Am I not sick? Is somebody in my family sick? Do I have the energy to do what I need to do? And then, well, okay, if those things are going on, then what is the root cause? What is the source of all that? And that's where I get to emotions. They affect our decisions. They affect how we feel, how we show up. So, of course, they're going to impact whether or not, if you do these 10 things, you will decrease the likelihood of having some health issues. We'll see those things. We need to eat vegetables. We need to work out. We need to avoid stressful situations. We need to avoid substances. We know cognitively that we can see every study and we can see the data. Cognitively, we understand if we do those things, we will be better, but we struggle with doing those things. What happens when I know I'm not supposed to be eating these late night burgers, but I see a commercial and that commercial, they have it just right. The lighting is just right. Man, that can I control my impulses or do I need to get up and go to the restaurant and go get one of those burgers? That's impulse control. So impulse control is to me the thing we should be targeting versus saying, hey, here are all the wrong things about this burger. Here's how much calories it is, here's what it will increase. That stuff, we understand it, but the trigger that we can do something with is that EI part. And think about self-awareness and self-regard. If I don't feel good about myself, then why try? If I don't feel
Hmm.
good about myself, then why am I giving my 100% or more? And so, Tyler, I think all of this gets back to these this emotional foundation. In many ways, I talk about emotional maturity. That's the foundation for so many of the decisions that we make in our daily lives, including those that affect health and wellness and those that determine how engaged and productive we are at work.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that that foundational piece. Now, 2 points I would like to raise are, Dr. Conrad is a proud vegan friend of mine. So the way
Yeah.
he focused in on vegetables to start, and then
I went
addressed the
straight for the
burger.
burgers, right?
Absolutely, yeah, it's something we like to see all the time. And so, I just thought I'd point that out. Now, the other thing is this concept of self-awareness. When I go to Costco on the weekend and I see the number of unself-aware people out there, it's mind-boggling, right? People are in their own little bubble and they're the king and the queen of their little realm, and that's it. There's no consideration for other people whatsoever. And we know how well that this translates into the workplace. We kind of see this all the time, and all these other aspects of health can sort of permeate in with that, given what you just said. So, I definitely have a newfound appreciation for that sort of piece because, from my background as an epidemiologist, is typically not something that we tend to deal with, right? We're not looking at personalities, we're not looking at emotional intelligence, we're looking at the health outcomes and then working our way backwards to try and figure out how we can steer these in a better direction. So I definitely can appreciate that. Um,
Yeah,
Excellent.
Tyler, if I could just jump in, you mentioned Costco. We didn't talk about this, but that's a perfect example. So I don't eat any samples. They have all these samples of things.
Mhm.
So for me, I know they're trying to sell me something. I know I'm I'm an adult. I'm mature. I don't have to run for it. I'm not going to stand in line to get something that I probably wouldn't buy anyway just because you're giving it away. That's part of emotional intelligence. So in my mind, I just don't eat the samples. I don't care if it's a vegan product, if it's something else, but it's kind of like a decision that I've made intentionally that I won't do that. I won't fall into
Mhm.
the trap that's set up for me. That's just a perfect example of what emotional intelligence is. And the people who just running, just falling for those
Mhm.
traps, that is when they're potentially showing a lack of emotional intelligence.
So I just tripped into that one.
You
So
just trip right
that's good
into
to
that
hear. Now my kids,
one.
on the other hand, like I'm the same way as you, Jarik. I don't do the samples really at all. I don't really find them all that appealing. I'm pretty particular, but my
Yeah.
kids are all about the samples. So maybe they're not that emotionally
But they get an
intelligent at the end of the
excuse,
day.
right? They
Yeah,
get an excuse.
developing brains, right?
That's
That
right.
prefrontal cortex isn't quite developed. Excellent. All right, so let's move on to the second item that we've put up for today's discussion. So this is how to spot the emotional barriers that trap employees in cycles of stress and preventable chronic disease, even with the strong benefits in place. Now, Dr. Conrad and I sit on the Wellness Alliance board, the Wellness Advisory Board, which is part of the International Foundation of Employee Benefit Plans. So we are exposed to a lot of conversations around employee benefits, multi-employer plans, all these sort of things. So we've got really good line of sight into how these are structured, what the goals are, how they're evaluated, and Dr. Conrad and I are there to provide insight from a health and medical perspective on those sort of things. So we kind of have that nailed down to a certain degree, but we're always learning more. I'm always looking for new applications. So I think that, assuming that you do have a very strong approach to benefits in place, and not all organizations or employers do, then, how can we look at these cycles of stress? And because I think when you and I were discussing this webinar, you brought up some pretty interesting things around how this can actually work against you from a barrier perspective, and then what could we do from a practical point of view on how do we actually steer this in the right direction?
Yeah. A couple of things I think about. Number one, level of stress is just, we keep saying we can't take any more, but then we give people more, especially our high performers. We tend to,
Mhm.
to give them more because they produce. So we give
Yeah,
them.
that's the reward.
Yeah, those are the ones that we burn out. We don't have a mechanism in most organizations for people to raise their hands and say, "Hey, I'm getting to my breaking point." Sometimes people don't even understand their breaking point, that emotional self-awareness and that whole stress tolerance. Those are aspects of emotional intelligence that people might not even be in tune enough with their bodies to understand where that is. The other thing that becomes a barrier oftentimes in organizations is our culture, and we're guilty of this as HR people. We want to celebrate someone's service, right? They've been here for 20 years. They've made these big contributions. We've had all kinds of seminars about eating healthy and working out and all that tied to our wellness programs. But to celebrate this person's 20th anniversary, we bring in cookies and cakes and all the stuff that we're telling them not to eat in the wellness class because we're caught up in an emotion of celebration. So I have this saying, I think it's behind me: don't let culture, cost, or convenience ruin your health. And so our culture, our traditions, how we celebrate, how we recognize, how we say, hey, I love you, I appreciate, I care for you, is through a holiday party, a happy hour, a special treat for this, for that. And so we're sending mixed signals for organizations. And, emotionally, there's this dissonance that people go through. The same people who are telling me not to do X, Y are kind of bringing me the stuff that will enable me to do X, Y. So those are the kind of things that we do, the traps that we set up without even realizing it in our organizations.
Yeah, it can definitely feel like a trap. Years ago, I remember this distinctly. I was in the boardroom of a wellness company, and given a presentation to senior leaders and the owners and the board of directors on evidence-based practice and things like this. And I was astounded because when I sat down, ahead of me was a beautiful fruit display that actually matched the company logos. Okay, the same colors were there. There was kiwis, there was blueberries, like all the stuff that I actually love as a fruit. And I was like, this is the first time in my life I've actually seen somebody walk the talk here, and they're actually showing this. So I sat there and ate blueberries and spoke for probably 2 hours, way too long,
Yeah.
but was thoroughly enjoying myself because, and you're right, we tend to look at the donuts and the cakes and all these sort of things, high calorie exposures, and when it's so much simpler to do the other thing and have it more aligned with the values of the organization and the culture that they're looking to curate and support for their people. And I always bring that example up because it's fascinating, and it only happened once, right? Of all the
Yeah.
companies I've been involved with, I remember going to some insurance companies, and I'd be sitting in there, I'm going, okay, this is actually the worst diet I've ever seen laid out on this table, and everybody's just bowing down, and you're operating on that salt, on that sugar, on that fat sort of train, right? So
Yeah, I think
fascinating.
Tyler, it's part of it for me that's disappointing. We talked about this a little bit in different contexts before the call, but part
Mhm.
of it that is disappointing to me is that we've given up on people. We've just said, hey, our costs are going to continue to go up. These chronic issues, they're just going to continue to get worse. People are going to continue to get larger and larger. We just have to figure out, how to live with that as like a foregone conclusion that we can't get better. And that's just the furthest from the truth. We can absolutely get better, but it's going to change. It's going to take this individual and collective shift in mindset for that to happen.
And very well said, Jarik. And it brings us into, okay, what are the practical steps here? Like, how can organizations and people who are influencing and helping to shape these organizations truly leverage the power of emotional intelligence to get better outcomes?
Yeah, I'd say first of all, I would advise everybody to invest time in developing yourself. There's so many free tools out there. You can go to the consortium site. There's research studies out there. You might find some things I've written as well out there. But it's individuals investing in their emotional intelligence, understanding what it is. It's organizations investing in the emotional intelligence, especially of their leaders, particularly those first line supervisors, first line managers, because they have such an outsized impact on the culture of your organization. I mean, those people need to have these skills and they need to be equipped to help others develop those skills. So I think it's important to recognize we need to be investing in that stuff. And just on a practical basis, if you don't even have the language around EI, you haven't had all that training, just I think about start to be a little bit more mindful and notice how you're feeling. If I see a news report and it elicits some kind of reaction, what is that reaction? Where is it coming from? So notice it and then name it and then replace it with something else. This is very practical. I went back to I started with the commercial, the burger commercial example. You see it, man, I want to go and do, well, what is that? What's driving that? Do I just really have a taste for a burger, or do I really want the feeling that that burger might give me? And what is that feeling? Is there another place for me to get that feeling? So shift it and do something else. That's very practical. It's hard, but it's just practical. What I have this strong feeling, whether it's positive or negative, I have this really strong feeling, this really strong impulse. Do I understand why? Do I know where it's coming from? And is it appropriate in this given situation? What's going to be the likely outcome if I act on this feeling? And if I can understand that, then I can choose something else.
Which I think makes very good sense from an individual's perspective, with regards to, embarking on a health improvement journey and really learning, what makes you tick. Nobody knows your body better than you, right? And this is something I tell people all the time, especially when they're coming in for advice. And it's like, so you ask a series of questions around these sort of things to help them frame that. But how do we take that to the human resources, to the benefit folks, to say, hey, listen, how do we actually design programs and approaches and strategies to best support people in this sense? Because we've got a long ways to go on the individual side. How much further do we actually need to go on the organizational side too?
Right. I think first, Tyler, we need to start with the HR team. And so I have a keynote that I do called HR for HR. You know, one of the teams in the organization with the worst outcomes from a stress, from a just, physical, health, emotional health is the HR team. And we're designing the wellness programs. We need them more than anyone. So I would say for HR, let's start internally. Recognize that there are some issues and there are assessments out there. We don't have to guess at this. I use the EQI 2.0. There are various
Mhm.
other assessments that are out there. Invest in getting an assessment to kind of see where your team is. And those assessments come with recommendations that are, proven, evidence-based strategies that people can move their organizations forward. So I always say, start with an assessment to kind of get a gauge of where you are. Look at what those recommendations are. Prioritize two or three areas where you are going to grow and invest and grow as a team, and have a mechanism to check in regularly about that. What's your typical check-in gonna be so that you can have a real-time sense of the progress that you're making, and then you reevaluate after that. So it's fascinating for me that companies that handle million and billion dollar decisions every day find it very difficult to make the right decisions when it comes to these kind of issues. Bring your whole tools to bear. Bring your whole brain to bear. Bring all those cognitive abilities, bring the analytical skills, bring all the things that you bring to bear to figure out what makes a customer tick and understand what makes your employee tick and how to help them tick in a way that's going to be beneficial for the organization and beneficial for them.
Excellent. And, a very unique perspective because, these types of assessments and approaches are things that forward-thinking organizations are already doing anyways from a leadership development perspective. But the fact that we're not linking it to health is a detriment, right? So
That's
the
right.
the health is an added benefit to something that can go along with this as well. So I definitely think that's there's something there, right? Something better under the hood.
Yeah, and just when you know, and we're targeting the wrong problem. When we see things like the obesity level rising, these chronic disease, those are symptoms of a deeper issue. And we have to just peel back the onion and focus on what is at the core. What is the issue that is the driver of these behaviors. Once you figure that out, man, again, people will make better decisions to take care of themselves, and they'll make better decisions to take care of the organization.
Way to link it to yet another vegetable there, Dr.
I
Conrad.
got it. To
Appreciate
peel
it.
back the onion. You caught
Yeah,
that.
I'm following you.
I've made
Excellent.
burgers the enemy, and these vegetables, these are our heroes, right?
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time and your energy this morning. I always appreciate our conversations. Hopefully our viewers really appreciated this perspective and your insight. We couldn't do these sort of things without you. We're so grateful. And we're going to turn it over to Daryl here.
Oh,
Thanks so much, Tyler.
Exactly what I suspected. Really intriguing conversation. And I got to be honest and say I was embarrassed to come back on and say that I love the free samples at Costco. So
I
I
You are
shouldn't
the
think,
foodie.
look, I shouldn't judge anybody about that. All I'm saying is have some strategies to avoid the obvious traps. That is the exercise of emotional intelligence.
well, thank you, Dr. Tyler, Dr. Jarik. That really was a fascinating session. As I say, you'll be able to find this if you would like to listen to again on our website in just a couple of days. This concludes today's session. Thank everyone for joining us. Thank you for our presenters for the time. We look forward to seeing you again next month.
Thank you all.
Thanks so much.
Stay
Take care,
healthy.
guys.